Hi guys, welcome to the channel. I'm back with another mixing tutorial for you today, and we are going to talk about bus processing, what it does, how to use that. We are going to look at one of my last tracks which I've made, and I'm going to show you some examples how to properly use bus processing to achieve the best results. First of all, I want to talk about what is bus processing and why you need to start using it. And bus processing is basically a group of similar channels which go to the same group, same bus, and you are basically using plugins like compression, saturation, EQ to shape your sound, to glue your track together. And especially those groups, those elements. For example, you can see the kick and bass are in the same group, in the same bus, so it just helps to glue them together. And before we start talking about processing and stuff like that, I want to give you some tips, guys. As you can see, I have 4 groups, and those groups are made up of similar channels. So for example, FS, I'm using some lasers, some sweeps, some uplifters, downlifters, stuff like that. And this goes to one single group where I process it further. So find the colors you'd like, guys, and group similar elements into one group. The next question is how to use bus processing. And before we dive deeper into the processing itself, I want to give you some more advice. And before you start working with your groups, make sure that you've processed your individual channels. So for example, the kick and bass, as you can see, I have an EQ, I have saturation, compression, and a little bit more EQ, adding some punch, some low, and to the kick and to the bass. And the reason for that is you should look at the bus processing as a shaping tool. So you basically just shaping your individual channels a little bit. When I use bus processing, when I use plugins, these settings are actually very soft, and it helps to keep the original balance of the track and, for example, not over compress it. I'm using basically the same plugins for my groups. It usually starts with an EQ. As you can see on the kick and bass, I'm just cutting the MIDI frequencies and cutting the I-ends. After that, I use saturation, and it not only makes your track more glued together, it makes it much warmer, much more pleasant for our ears, because it creates some harmonics which we like. The next thing I usually use after saturation is compression, and as you can see, that's the O processing for my kick and bass channel, an EQ saturator, and a compressor. Let's try and listen the kick and bass group with some bus processing so you guys can hear the difference. That's with bus processing. And now I'm turning off all the plugins. I wouldn't say that the difference is that big, but in the context of the mix, it really makes the difference. It really reduces the dynamics of our kick and bass. We obviously don't want that. We want our kick and bass to be in the center, in the middle of our track. And for the instruments, I'm using the same chain, basically an EQ, reducing some of the harsh frequencies. As you can see, it's -2 decibels. I'm not going crazy like -6, -10. This should not be happening. If you are making such a mistake, make sure that you've worked with the individual channels, because there might be something wrong with some of your instrument synthesizer or some other sound. And the next thing is saturator, again, just to reduce the dynamics, to make our group a little bit warmer and more pleasant to our ears. The next thing is a compressor. I think it's an emulation of SSL compressor, and the reduction I think is around 4, which is okay for electronic dance music. You should not be afraid of using a lot of compression. It really depends on the genre you're in. For example, I've figured out that compressing a little bit more actually works very good for my style of music. And now without the buzz processing, I would say that it really helps to glue our instruments together. I think I need to increase the gain just a little. One more thing I want to talk about, guys, is sidechaining your groups. You can use a volume shaper or a compressor. I like using compressor on my groups. Let's look at my drums. That's without buzz processing. I can already tell that my drums sound very good even before the buzz processing, and you should always try to achieve the same sound, guys. And now again, on the drums, cutting the harsh frequencies, the low shelf, just to give a little bit more space for our kick and bass, and I'm cutting the higher frequencies because I'm boosting those with an analog EQ emulation to make my drum sound a bit crisper and nicer. Yeah, the difference is actually quite big. And I'm using the transient shaper before the saturator because the saturator works similar to a compressor. Therefore, I'm not afraid to boost the attack. As you can see, guys, the reduction is not very big because I don't like squeezing my drums. I like keeping that dynamics, keeping those transients, and I recommend trying that approach and see if that works for your music. And the last thing is boosting some frequencies with analog EQ emulation. You can do that on individual channels like instruments, kick and bass, maybe some drums, and you can also do this on groups, but I usually don't use it on the groups besides the drums. As you can hear, guys, it sounds so much nicer, so much crisper when I boost the higher frequencies on my drums. And the last group is effects, and for the effects, I'm using the same settings, almost the same. The saturator, and I'm not even using a compressor on my effects since I think it already sounds pretty good. As you can see, guys, it's very simple. You just need to play around with it and make a couple of tracks, and after you've done that, you will improve your mixing, you will understand how to use it, and I'm sure it will help you a lot. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.